Hi and welcome to Breakpoint, everyone. The topic for today is from zero to one, bootstrapping security for your organization. With the rise in the number of digital startups, many of us in security and engineering find ourselves in a place where we are the first of the lot. Our guest for today is Prajal Kulkarni. He's the Chief Information Security Officer at Groww. He has over 13 years of experience in securing infrastructure, designing robust security frameworks, and assisting startups in their initial security journey. Hi, I'm Neelu, a technical security enthusiast and your host. I welcome you to the Breakpoint Security Podcast. In this podcast, we'll explore the depths of defensive security. We learn the methods and techniques that the smart security teams are using to solve practical security challenges today and innovate their way into the future. Welcome to Breakpoint, Prajal.
Thanks, Neelu. Thanks for hosting me. I've been a avid listener of your podcast. I've heard a couple of them. I like the approach. I like how methodical you ask questions and make everyone comfortable on your podcast. So it's really an honor for me to be on your podcast today.
Thanks a lot for that, Prajal. I think the topic that we have today is very relevant to what's happening today in the information security scene, and not just in India, I think in many other countries as well. We have a lot of these startups coming up, and what I wanted to know, and I think the first and relevant thing that comes to our mind in this case is, what are the first few things to do, particularly before starting security? So generally we talk about starting security and then what, but what I want to start off with is, I'm shifting left here as well, is what are the first few things for teams to do before even starting security? So I'll give you a quick scenario here. So you look at startups today, these may be product startups or otherwise. What happens is they have a business idea, they go about it, they have these first few set of customers, they have their MVP, and they keep building on top of it for a long time until they reach a point where maybe a set of their customers call out and say that, hey, have you thought about the compliance, or how do you meet this particular regulation, because we need that. So oftentimes, because their customers need compliance, they would start thinking of security in the practical sense, and these would typically be the engineering side of folks. It would be the engineering leads or the engineering org as such, and then they get someone on board for security. So what is it that you would suggest to them, first of all, to think of in terms of security before even getting someone for security in their organization?
Right. Neelu, I feel the entire product security charter in Indian ecosystem has been fairly a 13 to 14 years a new initiative. Earlier to that, I don't think so any of us would be thinking about product security as a full-fledged charter, right? And that goes true for even today's startups. They have been working primarily on getting customers to attach to their business ideas, selling what they feel is going to be the next $1 billion idea, right? And very important for the engineering function or the product function to kind of understand security also along with their business acumen, which I feel is very important. And the moment you think this is going to be the next big idea for them, they also need to bake into security as one of their integral functions as part of their business idea as well. Because today, if you go on the internet and talk to anybody, regardless of the age group, everyone is very paranoid about internet is going to be the next data security breach, and this is the reason it's going to be causing my financial breach, etc. Regardless of the age group, everyone has that paranoia. So security for any startup becomes an integral function as part of their organic growth. And to your question, what engineering or product needs to start doing initially before they get onto the security on board is start introducing small things in the security SDLC journey itself. If a product or a dev engineer is working on something, it's important for the engineering leader to make sure that this is also part of your OKR. Security is also part of your OKR. It's not just that this is a code that you want to write and be done with it. You have to make sure that every employee, regardless of what function he's part of, security needs to be one integral part of that company.
Yeah, so in the very beginning, right, I think OKR is what all the developers look forward to. That's the primary thing in terms of development to fulfill. You can have some security metrics as part of that as well, is what you're suggesting, is it?
Absolutely right. And this has been one of my core functions, that anywhere I've been in any of the companies, I try and make sure I socialize security as much as possible. Be a leader for security within the organization, so that everyone knows that this guy is the person who comes and bothers us for security, right? And that kind of also puts in a fear among everyone that security needs to be there everywhere, regardless of your product or development engineering, or even an HR function for that matter. HRs also take care of a lot of data, employee data. They share a lot of data with third party companies for, say, industry benchmarking and all that. It is not restricted to only development as such. Security goes across cross functions within the organization, and try and socialize as much as possible, be it an OKR, be it a goal setting, whatever it is. Everyone needs security as part of their goal setting in their function.
Yeah, I think there's a very nuanced aspect here of, this is tactically how you do it, but I think you're also making it official, because many times it's not even official. And I've gone to many of these teams where what is official is only what is in your, for example, acceptance criteria, right? Or what is in your functional OKRs.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, so once you're there, right? For example, once you're already there, you've been onboarded as your, the security person, and you might be actually representing the 1-person security team, or you might be leading the security team in that case for the startup. What are the things to address first? Like, for example, we know that all of these smaller security teams are playing multiple roles, right? And they're looking at a lot of things, whatever be your domain, essentially, the primary domain, you obviously have to look into a lot of things parallelly. Now, in terms of leading these teams, what is your, that prime mantra of figuring out what is urgent and what's important from a security lead's point of view, essentially?
Yeah, right. See, whenever we enter any company, regardless of the role and the job description, it's very important for the employee to understand the organic business of that company. You may be a security person, you may be a dev, you may be product, but you should know what the company is into. The company can be into an e-com space, fintech space, vanilla payments, or maybe even gaming for that matter. You need to understand the basic DNA of the company, which kind of helps you strategize what is that you're going to secure, what is that is actually the core asset which you need to protect, right? It's a simple war tactic. If you want to protect 10 things, you have to kind of understand these are the 2-3 important critical aspects of these 10 things that you need to kind of protect, right? So it goes to security for that matter. You are onboarded, try and understand the organic business function of the company. If you understand that, security can become a very natural thing for you, because you carry enough of experience along with you to make sure you apply that security acumen to protecting the critical assets. So in a way, I try and understand if we are dealing with data as one of the most critical assets, if we are dealing with payments in terms of as a business, or it can be just the regulations or compliances that drives the company. Think it in this way. If an adversary is supposed to attack you tomorrow, what is that one piece of thing that he's going to go after? which can impact maybe the brand reputation of your company. It can lead into a breach, or it can be completely a disaster in terms of your P&L numbers, right? So if you kind of understand that simple aspect and build that awareness around business, security becomes a very innate function. Now, coming to your distinction on how do you derive what is important, what is extremely important, I think that will be everyone's prerogative in the kind of ecosystem that you play. Some of the times, I feel if you start very small, understanding the business requirements and building a secured perimeter first. I think one of the things that we do as part of security professionals is, we have seen the other side of security as well. We try to break into things, right? And where do we start? We start completely as a, hacker, black hat hacker, where we get bunch of, endpoint assets and we try into breaking them, right? So if you need to do that aspect first, you kind of also need to secure your perimeter. So I think that is
what
one
you
of
can
the,
break into, essentially.
exactly, and that becomes one of the most important aspect to start with. You kind of secure your perimeter, and then on you can build. You rely on a maturity framework for security. Pick up on NIST or any of these well-defined frameworks, and build your security strategy on top of it.
Yeah, I think that very clearly calls out what have always been the priorities, but which has not changed even today, right? Defining your perimeter and things. Okay, so while that, I will come back to that as well. I think I have too many questions there. What I was trying to get my head around first, I think many of our listeners would also want to do that, is even those there who are in this space, is the area of risk and compliance. This is generally the first one. This is also many times the premise, like I was saying, to start off with having somebody into security here in the organization. How do you go about defining the right set of security policies and procedures? Because we know that policies can often be just, not just restricted to the regulations that you have, but definitely even many times go beyond that. So how do you define the right set of policies for your organization? And when do you know it is good enough? Because remember, we're talking about a time when there is nothing in place. So where do you start and how far do you go initially? And are there stages to it? Like, how do you go about it?
Right. See, regulations and compliance generally play a very important role if you're playing in that regulatory space as a business, right? In the current example that I can give you is me and my role in the current organization that I'm part of. We are heavily regulated business entity, and it's not just one entity that we have our business into. There are multiple entities and different regulations that we kind of have to look into. So it becomes bread and butter for us. Now, to your question, Nilu, if this is the only thing that you chase as part of security, or this is something becomes a Bible for you, I believe there is always a hybrid model of security where compliance always plays an important driving function for security, which is in a way your bread and butter. You cannot be non-compliant to a regulation. And then there is a real security charter also in parallel that you drive, something which may not be part of your compliance framework, right? And that's my opinion. You play a very hybrid security charter throughout the year, which kind of balances the compliance and also takes your security charter together. So building your security charter is always a mix of compliance and security strategy that you want to play.
So yeah, but on that note, like my question was, because a lot of things keep changing in the tech landscape, particularly in the threat landscape as well. I mean, we'll come to the tech part later, but even in terms of threats, right, there are new threats coming up every day. Have you seen the need to evolve your policies and procedures in the light of certain threats, which might be very much aligned to your business, particularly because you will see there are some threats or attacks typically targeted towards banking or insurance or other firms, right? Or healthcare. So depending on your business domain, if there are threats, do you evolve your policy then around that? Like how does that work?
Absolutely. See, regulations have been done by people who have understood threats around that ecosystem and the business that they are in, right? A lot of times we have seen regulations, if say PCI for that matter, PCI is not a frequent changing Bible for that, given an example, but then SEBI or, some of the RBI requirements that you see, these kind of frequently change and they learn the ecosystem quite well to amend those changes in their frameworks as well. The frequency with which SEBI, for that matter, releases security circulars quite higher than PCI or ISO, right? And you have to change your policies. You have to amend your procedures accordingly. Given an example, I think having a dedicated EDR on an antivirus on your endpoint, or rather, the endpoint security kind of became big in the last 1.5 years. And that, if you see, was an outcome of a specific breach which had happened. I don't want to go into that specifics, but that was an outcome of that particular breach. And yeah, it does matter. Some of these regulations keep changing and you have to amend your policies accordingly.
But now that you're talking about the breach, I think the breaches and attacks that happened and of course led to people now emphasizing on EDRs, and EDRs don't come cheap as compared to the traditional firewalls that they were used to working with. This is also the case of, for example, if your regulation suddenly has a change and now wants you to also have a hard token for an MFA, that's also an additional budget. So all of this additional budget, then you will have to also get which you may not have budgeted for previously. So how do you like to go about that? Because that can be a point of friction between the security team as well as the leadership to get that additional budget for a certain policy change now, and now you want to implement something which will at scale will cost you a lot.
Yeah. See, when it comes to getting a security budget, and that is one of the discussion points when it comes to regulations and compliance. It's never a hard sell. If it's part of the compliance or if part of the regulation framework, and you have to have an EDR, it is a very easy conversation with your leadership. You have to budget it, otherwise we are non-compliant. Now, in the other case where you have you want to have an EDR and that is not part of your compliance, this becomes a pure quality of the security leader, how this is conveyed to the leadership and how he or she is able to make the leadership understand the importance of an endpoint security solution and how it's going to help the entire business in a long-term journey. That is the conversation which the security person should have with the leadership, and that's completely that quality attribute. There is no other way to look at it, because most of the times business has their own objectives of spreading fast, growing rapidly, and security cannot always go hand in hand with the business pace, right? And you kind of have to balance security and business needs at the same time, and you see that friction. You correctly pointed it out. So it completely becomes your game to make sure that you pitch in whatever is needed according to you in the middle of the year where it's not accounted in the AOP, but you see that this is something that you feel is absolutely needed. It's a conversation that you can start, and it's completely a CISO quality to have.
Yeah, I think there can be an entire episode on that, but I will leave it there. But thanks for that insight. Now we'll come to the IT security part, and which we have been touching upon until now. Now there is this entire side of the org where you're looking at, the networks that have already been built to an extent, because maybe you are not there on day one as a security person. There are systems, there is infrastructure which is there, or there is cloud as of today. In the beginning, when you join such an organization or you're leading security for such a startup, there may be no visibility in terms of the IT assets, systems, even the access or permissions. and it might be all over the place. The existing ways of working might also be very different. They may not be structured for that matter. So what do you think are the measures that you can take to secure the network infrastructure, the systems, or the devices and things like that, given that there may be certain things which might be already running in a certain way? There may be design changes. The ecosystem, the IT ecosystem might itself have become a little more complex and may not have been designed correctly. So those, can you touch upon those nuances a little bit?
Sure. I think this question is linked to your earlier question of how do you start, what is important, what is must have, right? And we touched upon perimeter security. And whatever is your strategy, right? I think it is extremely important to understand your ecosystem. And to understand your ecosystem, inventory is one of the critical areas that you need to start first. And that's also part of your most important aspect that you do as part of the first day, maybe, or the first charter of security. So this is a very interesting area, building an inventory. There might be already existing inventory infrastructure which is serving the traffic. It could be on cloud, there could be IT infrastructure, there could be systems in your warehousing, anything, right? But then knowing the entire visibility of an inventory is very important. I think that is already established. Now, if you want to talk about how to do this, my easier approach is try and think as much as open source as possible. There are so many tools in the market that help you derive inventory from your cloud assets, your IT assets, which are maybe on-prem, on the cloud, SaaS components. Try and lean on as much as open source tooling as possible. We have been using a lot of open source tools in the IT infrastructure. For example, Snipe IT is one of those tools. It's a brilliant tool which you can use. It's an open source tool. On the cloud side of things, nowadays you hear a lot of cloud security posture management tools. These are available right off the box. A lot of them are open source. Some of them like Cloud Queries, Steam Pipe. These are very useful tools in building that inventory.
So if I understand correctly, you're saying start open source. I think that also gives you visibility into, first of all, what your assets are, but also in terms of the vulnerabilities. You are at a place, I think, gradually where you mature, and then eventually you can look at paid tools later on, depending on what your actual requirements are.
Yes, I think this kind of a strategy or an approach always helps in bringing that funding related conversations with your leadership, right? See, the moment you start a conversation where these things, you want a commercial tool, any person would ask you, like, why wouldn't you start with basics? If there are open source tools which can do this, let's start with it. There might be certain capabilities which the open source tool may not be doing it from out of the box installations. For that, you need to build a case which you can have a radical conversation or matured conversation with the leadership. So this is a very important quality that every leader should try and see in security, that start as basic as possible. Try and understand as much as your landscape requires and see the appetite, right? The business appetite for security may not be what you are thinking. I think that differentiation, if you build that awareness, it kind of works both ways, both for business as well as security.
Yeah, I think it also gives you, as a security team, the time to understand how getting processes in place related to even these open source tools are happening, what is the level of friction, which places you need to go. But also you don't end up spending a lot of time, debating and getting that paid tool, which may not be necessary for you at that time. So I think
absolutely
very rightly put there. Great. Okay. So now actually I want to touch upon the area of, I think that's my favorite area. I know for you, being a CISO, all or none are your favorites because you have to touch upon everything. But product security is an area that has been my go-to area. And what I wanted to know was, what are some of the foundational practices that you would put in place in terms of product security, particularly if you're looking for having a mature set of processes or teams in this area going forward? You know that you have a product which is going to become a product suite, right? A lot of products will get added. There'll be too many teams coming in the development org, and you need to set the fundamentals right. So what would it be in terms of the foundational practices that you would like to keep in at this initial stage where you obviously have less resources and less number of people in your security team as well?
Right. So I think this is one of those areas which we tried very early on in Flipkart as well, my previous gig, that we were a small team. We saw that exponential growth of development and business, but we realized that it's extremely difficult for us to grow at the same pace. And then we need a process and a mechanism where entire engineering kind of realizes where they can go to security, where they can raise a security review for. They need to, ship something very quickly today, but then they require a security touch point. How do you go that route first, right? And what we decided is basically we will come up with a simple ITSM process where any developer can come to that portal, raise a security request. This request kind of also kickstarts and powers my automation engine for, say, your PR scans or a quick code scan, give it back to the security guy who's reviewing it, build the same strategy for your shift left. So this becomes an entry point for you. Any developer who may understand simple security needs, he'll just come there, raise it, and that's it. He will be queuing it in our security ITSM, and that's a process flow that kind of kicks in. So I think that is something really worked for us in Flipkart, where every developer today, if you go and ask, where do you go for security kind of request, he will tell you, like, there is a portal. We have to just go there, click, raise a request, done. And then there is a standard TAT for whatever kind of request, category request that we have raised. Security team follows, and I know where to go and get it. In a way, selling our services to a engineering and a product function, security needs to start at one shop. That's your shop.
Yeah, I think very, very well put. I think there are a lot of things it's taking care of, like not just centralizing the whole thing, which is easier to do in a smaller org or a startup, but also having that visibility, making sure that everything is in one place, making sure that you are able to track. And at the end of maybe the end of the year, or depending on end of the release, you're looking at the timelines of what was met, what was not met. So in one go, I think you have touched upon a lot of different areas, which can be a challenge if it was the same scenario in a larger organization. But I think this is very well centralized input. But have you seen the challenge of the other side? Like once you have detected, you have all of those measures in a central place, the area of patch management, have you faced issues or challenges in that area, and how were you able to resolve that?
Yeah, see, patch management is one of those areas where the conversations with engineering functions become very hard. And sometimes it's a quick fix, sometimes it's you're fixing thousands of issues. So when we started on the journey where we kind of started detecting dependencies and library issues and packages, the first scan landed for like 1 lakh plus vulnerabilities. Classifying that into critical, high, medium, still narrowed it down to maybe a couple of hundred Ks. But this is a very hard conversation that you have. I think what works, Neelu, in this context is providing that exploitability, context. If this particular issue developer needs to look at immediately, or this can be rested, because anyway your environment for patch management is internally hosted. I'm talking about system patch management, not the web application side of patching for issues. That needs to go as part of your standard SLAs. But the system security issues, the dependencies, the libraries, these are the ones which take maximum time for a developer to understand why the hell am I patching issues which are posted internally, right? And what works in this kind of a conversation and also for the security side of function is to make sure annotate all these vulnerabilities to what is exploitable, or this can be an inline flow, and something like a log4j present on your server can be quickly exploited by an adversary. Um, this kind of a exploitability context always helps in getting this conversation easier, and patching becomes one of the native functions for an SDLC for any engineering.
Yeah, I think I understand, like the way you're putting it is quite simplified, and I think most of the listeners will be able to understand. Although I'm sure when you're actually doing it would have taken a lot of effort, even simply in terms of prioritizing that. But once that priority is in place, it makes it so much easier and simpler for the developers to focus on what's important and go ahead with even the IT orgs to go ahead with the right kind of patch management.
True.
Okay, I think one area that generally has been recently been talked about a lot and is also coming into play for many regulations in different organizations, different countries where businesses run is data protection and privacy. What I wanted to know is, although we are now looking at it post facto in many of the places, in the scenario that we are talking about, right, the startups where things are starting off, there obviously may be data points in place. They may be dealing with different kinds of data, like you mentioned, in terms of the business. It may be payments, transactions. It could be personal information and a lot of other sensitive kind of data. How can you safeguard this kind of data, ensure that there is compliance with the relevant kind of data protection? I mean, not every single thing needs to be in place, but what is it that you can prioritize as a security leader for such an organization? What would be your strategy, in terms of, for example, backing up that data, even retention, encryption? Like, how do you prioritize? Where do you start with all these data points?
Sure. So again, this is part of security aspect, which, if part of regulations or compliance, becomes an easier discussion, and there is easy buy-in, no need to hard sell. Versus if this is something that we as security professionals want to drive as part of the righteous security strategies, right? And the onset of GDPR kind of helped most of the product security companies or other companies who deal with customer data in that thought process, that when you deal with data, it is important for you to also think on data protection of that. As a country, we haven't started onto that journey of data privacy and protection. It's a bill which is in draft stage. Hopefully, will be tabled this year, the winter session. But then we kind of, in my previous gig, we kind of started preempting most of these aspects from the draft bill itself. All the attributes that we need to factor in as part of our data protection strategy. We kind of worked on entire charter for first discovery of data. That is a
That's a
mammoth task,
big area.
because you might feel, oh, data is just at one place, and then this is the customer path ingestion pipeline, and then you realize, oh, somebody else is also copying it. Some other systems are having the clone of this. Although you might put all your protection attributes at one place, you have to replicate it across. So in a way, it becomes a program management task. And this, if you want to start from the middle of the journey, it becomes a program management task. If you want to start from scratch, you have to make all your data attributes of rest in transit, encryption strategies or hashing strategies, whatever you want to use it. In the beginning of your business, it becomes a very easy for the rest of the org to comply to that.
Okay. Yeah, I think, it can be a big deal for a larger organization where a lot of data is in place, and I can totally relate to it. I think with some of the assessments that we had done earlier, it's not just the customer data. Why it's so difficult is not just the customer data and that your services are dealing with, but also the business data. There are different kinds of data that you would have in the organization. And as the footprint grows, this can be a really difficult task. So even for some of them where you have DLP in place, right? Many of us, because we're talking about startups, will not have such a tool in place. So I think that becomes increasingly difficult.
Yeah. There was one story that I had heard, and I don't know the correctness of this, but then it was a very interesting story with respect to business derivatives. So this it kind of struck me because you spoke about business data, right? And business data, for that matter, becomes one of the most critical aspects outside of PII. And this story goes like this: one of the competitions for a grocery business, and I don't want to again, pinpoint in Indian context or in the West context, but this is a startup which was trying to figure out grocery business in one of the continents, and they realized that they are on a public cloud after some point of time, and the competition which was getting all the derivatives out of the current startup were the parent public cloud, and this cloud also kind of started building on the grocery ecosystem by what this startup was doing. Most of the business derivatives were easily available to them, and they took all the data elements to build their startup. So that became a talk of town, and it kind of died off because that was a regulatory, violation as well for the public cloud. Yeah, let's not name it.
Yeah, but I think the lesson learned is would be to obviously keep your eyes and ears open and also think outside of just the business, because the whole business has a business ecosystem as well, where you have other competitors and you may have intellectual property and other things as well. Yeah. Okay, that was interesting. So, okay, so my last question, I think this is something that we have often we think about these things much later, once you have mature security teams or you have bigger development orgs, and that's about having the right kind of metrics. What do you think when you are in a place where you're just starting things off for a startup? How would you define the right set of security metrics? Like what really matters the most for you in terms of measuring and tracking, and will go a long way in terms of security? Like what will be those few things, given the fact that you would be a small team, you will not have so many resources to track and measure too many parameters in terms of security. What is it, what are those few things in general at an org level would you like to still track and measure?
Yeah, so two parts. One is when you have a small team and you can do that much as part of your small team, and one is when you grow big and you kind of start thinking on, say, maturity frameworks or risk-based frameworks, etc. The metrics become very easy there. In the small team context, when you have a bunch of folks doing certifications or product reviews for that business, one of the easier things to kind of start putting down for every product function is X number of issues that went in the last release or last month, and show that mirror to them. So what I have been a big proponent of doing newsletters or talking about security in general to everybody. So what we started recently was sending out newsletters where we kind of also prioritize this business function is having this issue in the last release, this function is having this particular issue in the last release. And we also talk about some nice stories like this issue was because of this, and this could have been resulting or into a breach of this sort. The storyline also becomes like a easier catchphrase for people to talk about. So that kind of a metrics really works when you show that this product function is having this particular issue and this kind of issues. Like you talk about P0s, P1s in your standard security metrics, right? But then if you also annotate it with something like these many injections, these many IDORs, these many XSSs, this becomes a talking point for the engineering to go and ponder later. And then as you grow, you can start slowly picking on any of the maturity frameworks as you discussed earlier, where they have standard security rating and weightage which you can give. That kind of metrics become very easy. And also you can think of any standard open source tool to kind of have that visibility for you. And that metric, again, you can annotate back to your product function or an entire org as such.
Yeah, I think I can clearly see what you're talking about. And I think in the beginning, right, these real stories have a real impact on people. And whether it be incidents that I've seen in some organizations, they talk about the actual incidents that have happened, or like you said, real things that might have gone wrong, that you were caught or detected early on, or even P0, P1 issues where they're able to relate to it because it is their code that they're writing, and what could be the actual business impact is something, if it is told in the right fashion, it really relates to them. And then eventually to drive the cultural side of that mindset, driving that mindset constantly, having that right kind of communication really helps at the right time, the right kind of communication, I say, because I've also seen over communication spoiling things for security, and I've seen under communication not working things out and not being effective at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was great. All right, I think that's all we had in terms of all the questions, and you were answering a lot of them. Thanks a lot, Prajal, for answering these questions for us today, especially related to startups. I have had so many different episodes where I keep bringing in the startup insights, the aspect of the startups, because we have so many today. I thought, why not have an entire episode on that? And you were foundational in helping us clarify a lot of things for many of us, helping these smaller teams today. So thanks a lot for being on the show and answering all the questions. And how was your experience?
Oh, lovely. I think been a while that I've spoken about all these foundational aspects of starting up in a product company for security function, and brought back a lot of memories, definitely.
Cool. Thanks a lot for joining us today, Prajal. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We'll see you all in the next episode. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Neelu. Bye.
Hey folks, that's all we had for today. I hope you enjoyed this one. Visit the podcast page for more such interesting episodes. You will find the speaker suggestions and other details in the show notes below. If you're interested in a security challenge of your own or would like to hear from a specific speaker or team, let me know in the comments below. Lastly, if you liked the episode, please go ahead, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and share with others in the community. It always means a lot when you do that. We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, Breakpoint signing off.